Welcome to the Whole Story podcast. This podcast series is focused on inspiring sustainability in agriculture, using the framework of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, also known as the SDGs. Each week, our guests are invited to share their story and leave us with some practical tips for sustainability on farms. I'm Becks Smith, founder of The Whole Story, a B Corp certified social enterprise inspiring, facilitating and articulating holistic sustainability in agriculture. And this podcast has been brought to life in partnership with the incredible team at FMG, who are passionate about partnering with organisations like The Whole Story, so together we can support rural New Zealand. So whatever you're doing while listening to this episode, thanks for choosing us. The best way you can support our mahi is to follow and share the show on whatever app you're listening on, and I hope this episode leaves you inspired and excited about the bigger picture of sustainability in agriculture. Today on the Whole Story podcast, I have the pleasure of reconnecting with Thomas MacDonald, Chief Operating Officer of Sprung Sheep Milk Co., a sheep milk nutrition company, taking the goodness of New Zealand sheep milk to the world, with milk supplied from over 20,000 milking sheep across the North Island. Thomas is a third-generation dairy farmer from Gordonton, Waikato, who has found a unique space within the New Zealand agricultural sector, combining our strengths of producing high-quality dairy products with our national expertise of farming sheep, where best-suited land use, farm systems expertise, existing infrastructure, sustainable practices, and a close connection with consumer combine. That's where you'll find Sprung Sheep. The New Zealand sheep milking industry as a startup sector is no stranger to the fast pace of change. So Thomas's insights into how to approach change are invaluable. So settle in with a cuppa for this next episode of the Whole Story podcast. Or even better, have a listen while you're out getting some much needed vitamin D. Spring has certainly sprung. Right, so welcome along today, everybody. Today we have with us Thomas MacDonald from Sprung Sheep Milk Co. Welcome along today, Thomas. I'm really excited to have you with us.
Hey, Becks, great to be here.
So kicking right into it then, I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about Sprung Sheep, about the business, and a little bit about yourself as well and how you got to here.
Yeah, for sure. I have the privilege of working with the Sprung Sheep business in capacity as Chief Operating Officer. In that, I get exposure to our farming and genetics business right through supply chain. So I've had the privilege of doing that since 2015, actually, when we set Sprung Sheep up. Back then, sheep milk was a bit of a novel concept for New Zealand. We knew that there'd be a market opportunity for it, that growth in alternative protein, and particularly in infant formula, was going to be something that's going to be a good fit for New Zealand, really. And we came back and said, well, New Zealand's really good at farming sheep. We're really good at exporting dairy products. Why have we not put these together? And part of my role and part of the journey that Sprung Sheep's been on has been figuring out how we do that in New Zealand, which has been a good lot of fun, really. And it's taken about 8 years, and we've grown the business today to farm close to 20,000 milking sheep and turning that into primarily infant formula for export out of New Zealand around the world.
So where are the farms based that supply into Sprung Sheep?
So at the moment, we have two sort of geographic regions, two milk pools, primarily in the Waikato. That's home for us. That's where our manufacturing facility is. And we've just recently expanded into the Taranaki region as well. So quite excited about that. I guess why those regions, primarily, as I mentioned, the manufacturing facility is there. That was really one of the key drivers for how we think about where we locate a sheep milk pool in New Zealand. Also, if you think more broadly about dairy in the country, some of the things we're thinking about, which is the land that has got the dairy IP and the dairy skill set from a farmer level. Where do we grow great grass? But then also the second layer to that is, well, where are the smaller farms that perhaps have those issues coming to them around economic viability, succession, sustainability, which I guess is the heart of this conversation today. So that's a bit of a second layer to why we've chosen to operate in those two regions.
Yeah, it just makes sense, doesn't it? I mean, you're leveraging off the expertise that's in the area, the land use within the area, and also that infrastructure that's already existing. So it's logical to me.
Yeah, absolutely.
So the work I do with the Whole Story, and I know we've spoken at length about this, is around sustainability. And one question we do ask all of our guests is, what does sustainability mean to you, Thomas?
Yeah, I think about sustainability probably on two levels. I guess the first one is around custodianship. care and nurture for what we're doing. But probably more lately, I've been thinking about the repeatability of things and the sustainability, or the ability to pass it through generations. And I think about that in a personal context in our own little family business, but I also think about that from a spring sheep context. We had the opportunity to set spring sheep up as effectively a new industry for New Zealand. There wasn't a demonstrated pattern of behaviour, a way of doing things. There was globally. So it was really important around that repeatability. And I guess the underlying driver for what we did in the sustainability space was, is this something that we can genuinely set up and say we initiated and we set the ball rolling on these practices, and we're proud of them from a custodianship perspective, but also a repeatability perspective. So I guess that's a bit of an insight to the two ways we've been thinking about it. Well, I think primarily the burden that we carried when you're thinking about a farm system design, setting up and pioneering a new farming system, was that there wasn't going to be the ability to blame the previous generations, perhaps for some of the practices that were seen in the industry. And so that is a great burden, but also an incredible privilege and a big responsibility going forward. And that's something we've tried to carry into the design of the spring sheep farming system.
Yeah, you can't pass the buck.
No, exactly.
So while we're on that personal front then, I guess talking about your journey to how you got to where you are now and involved with spring sheep.
Yeah, not a linear journey as could be expected, but I was born and raised in the Waikato dairy farming family. That's home just north of Hamilton on a little 300 cow dairy farm there. I did my time at Waikato University, but a particular emphasis probably more on finance and agribusiness there. And from that point, journeyed through actually into land court farming, and had the privilege of working with those guys in some of the large scale dairy operations. And land court farming back in 2014 were one of the original founding partners of Spring Sheep. Today, they still own 50% of the Spring Sheep business. And back then, I made the transition from the land court business into Spring Sheep with a particular focus on that farm system design and setting up the New Zealand side of the farming operation.
And another point, I guess, along your journey there, which we're quite connected in, is the fact that you were the 2018 Thomas MacDonald Award winner. Did you want to touch on that experience a little bit?
Yeah, I'm really proud to be associated with the Xander Award. And as you mentioned, it's opened up a wonderful range of people in the sector on both sides of the Tasman to network with and be involved with. I think for me, it's been wonderful to broaden horizons and almost link in with another layer of mentorship in the industry broadly. That's not so much the New Zealand dairy industry, but it's amazing what you can learn when you get yourself out of your own comfort zone across into things I'm thinking about over the Queensland red meat sector, for example, which through the Xander Award, I've had a privilege of spending a lot of time with operators up in that particular part of the world. And it's quite funny when you get into that world, the commonality between the issues that they're facing and you're facing at home, completely different environments, completely different sectors of the industry, but you can still grapple with the same core issues, which I've found a particular benefit of the award is just being able to pick up the phone and talk to some of those people and the relationships being able to build during the time since 2018. So absolutely proud to be involved with the award.
Yeah, and I can echo that, just that layer of mentorship and the connections. Yeah, it blows me away how much you can have in common with just completely different environment. I definitely agree. And such a cool bunch of people to be involved with. I think as well, I'm interested in knowing, so obviously from a cattle dairy farming background, how did all of your friends and family take to you shifting to the dark side of sheep?
It was quite an interesting journey, actually. I mean, as you could well imagine, sheep milking, pretty new for New Zealand still today. A few less looks when you mention that's what you do today. But back in 2015, it wasn't the said thing around Waikato, that was for sure. And so it's been a journey well and truly, and sort of had to prove itself. And we've had to convince more and more farmers to join us. But I think at its core, we took a lot of the institutional knowledge of the dairy industry in New Zealand and pulled that across, which gave us a touch of credibility, you might say. But no, there's been a few interesting conversations, as you could imagine, both at a personal and a family level, but then also at an industry level. I still remember the first national field days we went to as Spring Sheep. I think it was the 2015 field days. We had a little booth there in the pavilion, and the amount of people that walked past and thought, wow, is this really a thing? Is that exactly what they're going to do with sheep? And sure enough, you fast forward the 8 years and we were back at Michigan Field Days this last year with a stand full of people trying sheep milk cheese and drinking sheep milk and having flavoured coffees. So it's just amazing there's a little that time to socialise it in the New Zealand dairy context. I think what's funny is when we travel overseas and you go to a country like France, Spain, or Sardinia, the first thing they ask you when you're from New Zealand is how many sheep do you milk and how many cows do you milk? And they can't believe that we only milk less than 20,000 sheep in this country.
Yeah, it's amazing in that international context, isn't it? Like just those perceptions of what we do in New Zealand and also reflecting on their own styles of farming and what they do and why they can't see some of those things echoed here.
Yeah, you're exactly right.
So touching on funny stories then, I'd love to hear your funniest story relating to farming or agriculture.
I think there's probably not one in particular. The theme here is that it's gone from being a New Zealand dairy farmer's son growing up in the Waikato dairy industry and then branching out into sheep milking. So there's been a number of funny conversations in our New Zealand context. I think linking a few other things we talked about, the Thomas MacDonald Award, part of the award package that goes with winning that is a mentoring trip around Australia. And I had the privilege of jumping in a plane and flying around to meet some of these Queensland farmers. So you can imagine when a young guy from New Zealand rocks up in an outback remote cattle station, there's already a perception of what Kiwis are like in our sheep farming reputation procedures. But you say that you milk them to a North Queensland beef producer, you get a few sideways looks. And it took a fair bit of explaining and a few photos swiping on the phone to just really prove what we were doing was a legitimate industry in New Zealand.
Yeah, I can imagine you getting some good sideways looks there. But, you know, look at it now and look at how much it's grown through that time and also the opportunity ahead of you.
We're working on it.
So I guess going back to the bigger picture then, with regards to sprung sheep, what have been some of the low-hanging fruit with regards to sustainability initiatives within that business?
The first one I can think of is particularly the opportunity in front of us with sheep breeding. We've been fortunate enough in this industry to start a breeding program. We've launched our own breed. It's the Zealandia sheep breed. We've registered that with the New Zealand Sheep Breeders Association. All of our spring sheep farmers exclusively use the Zealandia breed of sheep. And one of the things you can do when you link milk supply and genetics together is that you can actually start controlling some of the different aspects around the breeding program to suit sustainability measures, productivity measures. One of the pillars that comes with the Zealandia breed is the fact that we've been pretty early on in the adoption of the methane breeding value in our overall breeding index. That's some wonderful work being done by our New Zealand scientists down in Dunedin, Invaluable, through ag research. And for me, that's a no-brainer when you look at some of the science there, particularly around methane reduction ability over time. And for spring sheep in our context, with our RAM team as part of that breeding value creation initiative for the last 3 or 4 years, and now being able to get the trending of that data and obviously push it into breeding index and make breeding decisions based on the relative methane output of our RAM team, which in turn obviously flows through the sheep flock. And so that's just one example where doesn't necessarily cost you a whole lot of money. It certainly doesn't take you a whole lot of time. It's sort of a couple of days worth of rams going through trailers to get the methane measured on them. And then it isn't costing us a significant portion in trade-off for some of those economic traits around milk production. So by definition, it becomes relatively low-hanging fruit on a journey to breeding low methane emitting animals, lining up with some of the country's obligations around net zero. So that's probably the key one that I'm excited about.
Going into that a bit deeper then, or from a more practical level, what do you think is the tangible progress that you've made with regards to the methane reductions of the flock?
It's a little bit hard to say empirically just because of the different weightings that different flocks have given overall, but I think the important piece is obviously having that background and that history and training with the recording, with the BV coming up so that we can enable different weightings of it as and when we need to. But overall, the science is still emerging. We're getting more and more evidence of what you can achieve with a generation interval. I think it's one of the levers that we see as being pretty key to our future in the methane space.
And are you seeing any interactions between any of the other traits you're obviously selecting for and selecting for the methane trait, like any trade-offs that you're having to make along the way or things that might slow your progress down there?
Yeah, I think it's obviously inherent in genetic breeding decisions. When you're breeding for one thing, you're making trade-offs and also comparing that. For us, primary focus of the program is around our milk yield and our overall animal efficiency. And so far, we haven't seen any negative impact on being able to breed towards those specific traits while including methane into our breeding index.
Yeah. And I mean, ultimately, it makes sense that more efficient animals should actually be more methane efficient as well. So actually, if you're looking for efficiency within your flock, inherently you will actually be selecting for methane efficient animals, but just wrapping that data around it and making sure that they're the animals coming through, right?
Exactly.
I guess that's pretty exciting in itself, but what else is exciting you about spring sheep over the next 5 years, and maybe even push it out further into a longer scope as well, perhaps the next 20 years?
Yeah, well, that's something we spend a lot of time thinking about, actually. I'll start probably where we left off there with the genetics program. I think one of the pillars of our business is obviously the Zealandia breed, and the fact we've partnered that with our farmers and have the ability just to take the genetic story through the farm system, through the product to market. That's a really exciting piece for us in our journey moving forward. But from a sheep milking industry in New Zealand perspective, the genetic gain that we're seeing annually in the Zealandia breed is particularly exciting. It's enabling the farm system to sort of improve its economics over time. It's enabling us to become competitive at a sheep productivity level with other sheep milking nations globally, and obviously supporting a new farm system here in New Zealand. And that probably moves me on to the second exciting part of our business, is really partnering those sheep and that market opportunity with New Zealand farmers. As I say, we're now in Taranaki region and Waikato region. We've got some wonderful partners in our farmers. I think the thing that excites me is that by nature, these guys are early adopters. They've come into an industry looking to make change to progress and move a farm system forward. And I personally get a lot of energy from the dialogue and the conversation with our farmers, just from that sense of energy and excitement that comes with building a new farm system. And then obviously on the front end, why we do what we do is to create grass-fed New Zealand sheep milk that we can market on the world stage. And that comes with a wealth of opportunity and excitement. And so for me, over the 5, 10, 20-year horizon, it's seeing sort of some of the new frontiers that we can take New Zealand grass-fed sheep milk to. Different products, different countries, different markets, and just seeing the consumer pull of sheep milk and then the resulting land use change and industry change here in New Zealand on the back of that. So that's sort of from genetics to market perspective, but there's plenty to be excited about.
Sounds it. Yeah, there's heaps going on there. So that's a pretty cool space to be able to play in, I guess. Interestingly, just want to touch on there as well, the Zealandia breed, what are the base genetics or the breeds that you started with within the New Zealand sheep milk industry?
Yeah, that in itself has been a really fascinating journey. So before 2014 in New Zealand, it was quite hard to import sheep breeding lines. And so New Zealand had been 30 years since the last true milking genetics had come into the country, and they were primarily East Frisian genetics. We took the best of those, about 3,000 sheep now that we could find, and turned out as we genotyped them, they were much closer to a New Zealand Romney than they were a true milking sheep. And that necessitated change to set the industry up and to get the ball rolling, I guess. And we jumped on a plane, shot overseas, and saw some pretty established, pretty mature sheep milk industries around the world, Spain, France, Israel, to name a few. And so we were really able to start with the East Frisian, a more advanced version of the East Frisian came to New Zealand, come from France, and the Menac from other parts of Europe. And so it's been a number of breeds come in, and I guess the Zealandia program has been fortunate to be guided by genomics from its inception. And so we've relied less on thinking about individual breed types and more about building the ideal genetic mix for our conditions here in New Zealand.
Yeah, 2 key points you raised there is that, basing it on the genomics and not the breed. I think we get pretty hung up in New Zealand sometimes on breed specifics, but actually it's the purpose of the animals we're trying to produce and staying true to that. Because, as you say, sometimes when you do a bit of that genetic testing, things that you think are East Frisians are actually more genetically similar to the New Zealand Romney than perhaps what you originally thought.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right in that. Probably links more to sustainability. We find ourselves constantly getting dragged back to talking about breed of origin or breed types, and you have to keep reminding yourself what we're trying to do is build a sustainable and enduring, resilient sheep for New Zealand pasture-fed sheep milk. And so when you keep your breeding objective number one and you're guided by the data and the genomic decisions coming out of that, you get less worried about those breed name conventions per se.
Yeah, and they say there's actually more similarity between two sheep of two completely different breed names than there is between two sheep within a breed society in New Zealand. So just a bit of food for thought for everybody out there. Speaking of food for thought, what's some of the best farming advice you've ever received, Thomas?
I think probably be amiss to not quote my father here, who through the course of growing up used to constantly refer to farming being 90% observation. And I sort of have to reflect on that as we've gone and experienced building farm systems for sheep milking as well. And we haven't always got that right, but as we've corrected and built a sort of a modern sheep dairy system in New Zealand, it's hard to go past that reflection that 90% of the gain that we've observed and the change we've been able to make is observation of either practice on farm or probably more specific to our context of the data coming out of the farm. And so that's probably been a bit of advice that's gone through into our farming systems in terms of design, in terms of data collection, data capture, analysis, and then implementing change. So yeah, to sum it up, it's been observation and use of data.
Yeah, and with a farming heritage, it's nice to quote your dad on that one. So it's cool to see that he's had such a pivotal role in that part of your journey and something you still reflect on today. So changing to kind of a topic that's dear to my heart at the moment and something we're seeing in our wider sector is this fast pace of change and the never-ending list of compliance and regulation that seems to be constantly coming at us. How do you yourself within Spring Sheep prevent overwhelm in that space, burnout or apathy, and support your business as a whole to stand up and face that challenge?
Yeah, that's a topic that we think quite a lot about, to be fair. And it's probably a fair assessment to say that our whole world as a sheep milk industry and establishing that has been about change. You know, we have constantly evolved farming models, feeding regimes, genetics, the design of infrastructure, even on farms, the size we thought farms would get to, breeding objectives that we'd target in the future. And so one of the concepts or the notions that we have is strong ideas held lightly. And so we're never too afraid in a Spring Sheep business context to be sort of rock solid and committed to ideas, but then be open to change as that data and that observation comes through. That's probably one. I think the other one is we're incredibly guided by our values at Spring Sheep. And so the specific ones that come to mind in this topic, give and get respect with each other around different viewpoints and different values that are coming across. We like to be passionate superstars. And so we carry a lot of energy and passion in what we do, and then integrity in everything. And so that's a non-comprehensive list, but just covering some of the mindset that we bring when we approach change and regulation and things like that. I think more from an environmental sustainable perspective, when we think specifically about regulation impacting a farm system, we have the benefit at Spring Sheep to be connected in a vertically integrated supply chain. So we get to talk to customers on a daily basis almost. And it's a privilege in the fact that we get real-time feedback from what the market is demanding, what the market is wanting. And I guess it's a fair comment to say that often regulation is just responding or catching up to that. And in our business, a lot of the constraints we've put on farm system design, be it feeding regimes or compliance and monitoring, has actually been more driven by customer focus than it has been by meeting regulation. And that's an interesting thing to grapple with in itself around how you extract value and partner with customers. But I think that mindset of always having an end consumer in mind, always understanding where your product's going and how you're going to monetize that and continue to build a sustainable farm system has led some of our approach in thinking to dealing with sustainability issues as they come from a regulatory perspective.
Yeah, and I think there's just those two key points are so important to touch back on, I guess, that staying true to your values or just keeping them really front of mind, but also being really adaptive, being really heavily passionate about an idea, but then really open to change. I think that's such an important thing to take away for everybody listening, no matter what scale of farming business you're in or what sector of the industry. Just those two key points of holding true to your values and being really adaptive to practical take-homes that people can actually put in place to be more resilient in the face of that change.
Yeah, I think well summarized. And what I'd add to that is we often find ourselves in a situation where we have to take on the alternate perspective or think about things from a different point of view. And we find that really helpful our business, even if it's internal dialogue that we're working on adding or improving something in a farm system, or whether we're thinking about a customer or market perspective. It's always really valuable to have your strong idea, hold it lightly, but then come at it from a different perspective. And it's quite often what you'll see when you do that is you soften that stance, or you end up in some form of compromise or getting to a better outcome. And that's definitely been our case as we've gone through the regulatory piece, be it around thinking about methane or greenhouse gas or nitrate losses and how we navigate that as an industry and steer through those issues. So, that's one that I think putting up your defences and burying your head in the sand is not going to drive the right outcome there. So we've taken a more open mindset to it and like to challenge our opinions regularly and often.
And I think also just being mindful of being consumer-led too. I think quite often we forget why we're in business in the first place. We've got to have an end consumer in mind because they're the people that keep the lights on and keep the gates open. So you always have to be mindful of what they want, what they're asking for, and what's important to them, what their values are. With the podcast, we like to leave people back down at the grassroots level. So as our last question today, I'd love to ask you if you had one take-home sustainability tip for other farming businesses, what would it be?
I think for me personally, I really enjoy the strategic thinking or planning in a 5 to 10 year context. So you can talk to anyone on my team, give me a near-term goal and a repetitive task for anything more than 20 minutes, and you'll lose my attention pretty quickly. I do like thinking about things and problems and opportunities over that longer term 5 to 10 year horizon. And that's for our business what we've done with Spring Sheep around thinking about our sustainability and our growth journey as well. I think for any farming business, sustainability can mean different things to a multitude of different farming businesses, but it always has to make sense in the context of where you'd like to take your business. It could be from a succession perspective. It could be from a growth and scale perspective. I think it ultimately needs to have that sustainability lens on it, be that true environmental sustainability. It might be the custodianship that we talked about at the start of this interview, but it could also be the repeatability aspect. Is what you're doing repeatable? What does it look like in 5 years' time? To your comment earlier, who is the ultimate customer of our farming business? And I like to think about those things on a 5+ year basis to help inform what you do in the immediate week ahead. So that would probably be my view on how we think about sustainability.
Yeah, that's such a wonderful take-home tip. And I think it's really interesting you say that you don't do well like in the short term, but you're way out here. I had someone refer to me recently and say, Becks, you're so busy thinking out here, and now we just need to put the steps in place to reverse engineer it back to today. And I was like, it's such a good way of thinking about it for the strategic thinkers out there. Think with that long-term horizon, and then either yourself or wrap a team around you to reverse engineer it back to the now. I just want to thank you so much for today, Thomas. We've had a few tech issues along the way, including an iPad overheating, and you have just handled it with such grace. And so thank you so much for your time and your patience. But I know that our audience will gain so much from this chat, and I look forward to catching up with you again soon.
Thanks, Becks. It's been great catching up.
What a great catch up with Thomas. I'd like to take some time now to reflect on some of the sustainable development goals that Thomas and I covered in this conversation and how they relate to the Spring Sheep Milk Company. Firstly, I think forefront of our minds has to be goal number 9, industry, innovation and infrastructure. This conversation with Spring Sheep hit the triple whammy here. They have been pivotal in the development of a new industry. They are innovative in their approach, and they have leveraged off existing infrastructure systems within the traditional New Zealand dairy sector. Goal number 13 is pretty obvious with their proactive focus on climate action, with their involvement in the low methane sheep breeding value program. Goal number 17, partnerships for the goals. I reflected on this with their close connection to the end consumer and that real-time feedback which allows them to adapt quickly to the signals they are receiving from markets. Next is goal number 11, sustainable communities. And I think in this case, it's not necessarily talking about a community bound by a geographical sense, but as a vertically integrated supply chain, Spring Sheep have built a farmer collective, which allows them to have a community of farmers that is supported with resources and security within the business. And lastly, goal number 3, good health and well-being. I really want to reflect on 2 points that Thomas raised around mindset in the face of change. Firstly, the notion of strong ideas held lightly. I loved this.
So how to be passionate superstars with rock-solid conviction, but be open-minded to adapt based on data or observation. And secondly, the practice of choosing to take an alternative perspective on an issue. This allows you to appreciate a different point of view and may either soften your standpoint or allow you to compromise on an issue.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Whole Story podcast. We really hope you enjoyed it and are feeling inspired and optimistic about putting sustainability into practice on farm. I have one last request for you before you go. Make sure, whatever platform you're listening to us on, that you hit follow and share the show or episodes with your friends, so that together we can grow our community and inspire sustainability in agriculture in Aotearoa, New Zealand. And thanks again to FMG for partnering with The Whole Story so that we could bring this podcast to life for you all to enjoy. Catch you next time.